from this computer. Okay. And then I'm going to go into presenter view. This is where I show myself being an amateur. And then I go into share screen. I'm sharing this screen. Share. All right. So you all currently see my presenter view. Thumbs up, yes? Nice. Okay, awesome. And then I'm going to assume that you all are looking at the note stock. That's not going to be on the screen, but you all have access to it, and I'm going to be scrolling through it and kind of talking through it here. And also, like, this is really casual. Feel free to jump in if you want. If you prefer to like ask a question at the end, there's a note section at the end with nothing in it. There already are some questions under the section frequent support issues related to OAuth. So maybe I'll just add a little header under that with like general questions. Okay, great, let's get going. So to start with, this is my hobby. This is something I got really into in the pandemic, which is finding pictures of my dog where he looks like Jake Gyllenhaal. It has nothing to do with OAuth, and it's purely just for your visual entertainment. So I just, this is it. This is the visual entertainment. So I just put the general topics on each of these slides so that you have something to look at, and then I'm gonna talk to the doc. So OAuth in general, as Oreo and Jake's faces show, this is quite the exciting, potentially scary topic. I'm not gonna talk through OAuth in general, partially because I'm sure many of you already know a lot about it. And also because I think the most interesting thing to talk about is kind of like, what does OAuth look like at GitLab, right? Because many of us, probably all of us, have worked at different software companies. Most of SaaS companies support OAuth in some way, but like it's a little different everywhere, right? So the question is like, how do we use OAuth? How do we talk about OAuth? And like, what is the impact of OAuth on us and on our customers? So with that being said, let's get into the first one. GitLab as an OAuth client. So this honestly, like when I think about OAuth at GitLab, this is kind of the primary use case that comes to my mind. I think about this first documentation page that I linked to in the notes, where it's like, hey, here is a giant list of OAuth providers that we support. We don't support all of these on GitLab.com. We support a small subset of them, but self-managed customers can enable a subset of these on their instance if they want. Some of them are well known, like obviously GitHub, Facebook, Atlassian. These are big software companies. Some of them are a little more obscure. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But we definitely support many, I think over 20 OAuth methods. So it's a lot to learn about. I'm sure our friends in support have gotten some obscure questions and you're like, wow, what even is this? And that's, choices were made in the past to support these, and we're working on deprecating some of them, but that's always a big challenge. And then the second bullet I have here is that, OIDC and SAML are themselves OAuth strategies, and they could be subtopics that we went into during this presentation. I chose to not go into them because they are like definitely their own topics that deserve their own lunch and learn like hour or half hour or 8 hours. So I'm not going to go too deeply into those, but just wanted to mention them in case somebody was really excited we're going to get into OIDC and then they're going to be disappointed. So one thing that's interesting, and like, so I know how we use OAuth, right? Like I am familiar with these methods. And as I was going through creating this presentation, I was like, oh, it is kind of strange that we like GitLab is the OAuth client in these scenarios, but we're really using it in a single sign-on capacity, right? So if somebody logs into GitLab with Twitter, and then we get an OAuth access token, we, GitLab, we don't use that OAuth access token to do anything, right? Like maybe the scope allows us to get tweets about the user or get information from their profile, but we don't do that. We're just using it as a single sign-on method, which is different than how OAuth is used in some cases, right? So in some cases, OAuth, like the whole point of the OAuth flow is to get an OAuth access token, use that access token to make a request to the resource server, in this case, GitLab, or in this case, sorry, the external service, which would be Twitter, Facebook, Atlassian, Okta. But we don't do that. We're just using it to say, okay, sign in to GitLab. You don't need a password. Just use your credentials from this other service and then come back here and you'll be logged in. And of course, users can set up as many OAuth methods as they want in GitLab, which I assume is a benefit to them. They like the idea of I can set up, Gmail, I can use my Gmail to log in, or I can use a password, or I can use these different methods. I think that's pretty flexible for users. I'm sure it also leads to a lot of confusion. I see a little chat. Oh yeah, good idea, Bogdan. We can move some of this content to the docs too. Great. So we're walking through this. So anyways, that was one thing that kind of, I don't know if anybody else has this experience, but one thing that confused me when I started working at GitLab is that people describe OAuth as single sign-on, which I had not thought of OAuth as sign-in and single sign-on in the past because I wasn't using it in that capacity. I was using it as a way to get access to another service, right? You authorize with a service, we get an OAuth access token, and then you can access resources, but it wasn't like the single sign-on method. You weren't signing into this external service. So that's one way that I would say that OAuth is a little bit maybe different at GitLab in the way we talk about it than in some other places that I've worked. So moving on, each OAuth connection is then saved as an identity associated with the user record. I've linked there to the identity class. And then users can then go in and manage their connected accounts in their profile. And then this final one is a real mind bender, which is that you can also have GitLab as GitLab can be both the OAuth client and the authorization resource server. So if somebody has self-managed GitLab, you can log into self-managed GitLab with gitlab.com. So log into GitLab with GitLab via OAuth. Kind of, yeah, bends your brain. We have a vendored version of the GitLab OAuth gem in the GitLab repo for this reason. There's something strange about it. Through a mind bender. Okay, so then that's the first use case. So in that case, GitLab is the OAuth client. It is receiving information from another service that is saying, okay, log in this user. Also, the opposite is GitLab can be the authorization or resource server. And this is actually, I didn't know until just researching this that an OAuth app, a GitLab OAuth application can be at the user level. I knew that, but it could also be at the group level or an instance-wide application. And I saw there was a question below of a frequent support question of why would you use one of these over the other? Does anybody have a good answer to that question? Why would somebody choose? I can imagine that you wouldn't, for example, in an organization want one individual person to create an OAuth app that they own in case what if they left the company and then that belongs to their account. You would rather have that belong to a group. But do we know why somebody might want to make it a personal OAuth app?
I'm not understanding the question exactly. Someone is making a personal OAuth app. Is that the question?
Yeah, so if you look in the notes under GitLab as authorization or resource server, oh my gosh, I forgot to change my jakes. Whew, okay. You can have a user-owned application, a group-owned application, or an instance-wide application. And so I guess support, the question below was people write into support and they say, well, why would I use group versus user versus instance. And so
maybe the
that's
reason is because if it makes sense to have a group level, we also have projects in personal namespaces. So if someone has a personal project, they might want to create their user level OAuth app so they can use it in their deployed application. But that
so
just
oh, sorry, go on.
yeah, that's just a thought. I'm not entirely sure. Like, when do we use? I actually have a use case for an instance wide. So, for example, the VS Code integration works that we create. We have an instance wide OAuth app on GitLab.com.
I am not sure. So if you're talking about OAuth app, so probably if you're creating an OAuth app at a group level, then the group owner can, that means the group owner has the ability or the access to to assign the application to all the users within that group. And for the instance-wide application, the same kind of ability goes to the instance owner. But for an user-owned application, it would be mostly for development purposes or testing purposes. I don't know. But a user-owned application can be for OAuth application.
That's a good thing for us to follow up on, because like that idea of the membership affecting it, I'm not positive that if it's at the group, if the OAuth app is at the group level, that the members, it's only scoped to members of that group. It could be the case, but I'm not positive. So this is a great question. We can come back to it. Or we can
I
continue
think,
going on it. Nice.
Oh, sorry.
No, who is that speaking? I can't see you.
Oh, that was me. That was me. I turned my camera off because it's night. Yeah, so I think so the question is about using GitLab as the identity provider, right?
Yes.
So I'm thinking that the user-owned application is what Smriti was talking about in terms of the user will configure it for whatever application they're, because it redirects, right? So you use GitLab as the identity provider, you sign into GitLab and it redirects to some other place, right? So if a user configures it, they probably want to use it to test whatever app they're developing. I think I haven't seen this come up in a support ticket though, but it's not, I haven't seen any of these come up in support tickets, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I think the good thing about this question, or why I like this question, is that like if a group of people who are working on identity at GitLab don't know why you would use these, like maybe that means there's room for improvement in documentation. Maybe it means one of these features like doesn't really make sense. Like why do we allow group and personal? Like maybe personal shouldn't exist, or I guess maybe personal has to exist because only paid users are allowed to do group, or I don't really know. But I think that it's a great question in terms of it will lead us to understand more, but I don't think we're going to figure it out at this exact moment. But I'm going to take it to do and follow up on that. Wow, everybody with something to dig up. Okay, continuing on in terms of GitLab as the authorization and resource server. And by the way, I noticed that you use the term identity provider. That's also the term that I always think of because I think about SAML. And in SAML, like the service that is providing the credentials for the user, that is saying like this is who this user is the identity provider. In the OAuth 2 spec, they call that the authorization server, and then there's further like a resource server, which sometimes they're separate. In the case of GitLab, they are the same thing. So the GitLab monorail is both the authorization server and the resource server in the context of OAuth. So that's new learning for me. So anyways, the GitLab is authorization and resource server. Behavior is defined by Doorkeeper. Somebody put in these notes before, like, what are the gotchas? Well, one of the huge gotchas with Doorkeeper is that we're using Doorkeeper. When there is a bug with OAuth in this part of OAuth, like even today, as I was researching this, I was like, yeah, where is the OAuth application model? Went looking for it, couldn't find it because it's not defined in our code base. It's defined in the Doorkeeper gem. And there it's like defined in this really weird way where it's like specific to active record and it's like a shared module, has all of the behavior. So I would say that's a huge gotcha that you have to remember to source dive into Doorkeeper when you're dealing with issues related to GitLab and OAuth in the context of GitLab providing the OAuth identity. We have a config file. I linked to it in there. This is a relatively new change, thanks to some people on this call. I think Imra, you worked on hashing, or no, it was Drew worked on hashing. It was Drew and Abu Bakr worked on hashing OAuth access tokens and OAuth application secrets. I know that caused a few challenges for users because as a result, we can only show you your OAuth application secret right after it's created. And after that, we hash and throw it in the database and we can't get it for you anymore. So I don't know if people in support have had issues with that. I know when it first happened, there were some UX questions around this, but it is, better than storing it in plain text. So that's good.
But I think it's pretty common, right? Like from my experience, they are never shown for a longer time. They are shown once and then it's gone.
Yes, I think it is pretty standard, but it is a change. I mean, these were changes made within the last handful of releases, so it was a change for us for how things worked for us. Although I know for a while we were also supporting non-hashed access tokens and application secrets. I don't know if we then went and hashed all of them or if we're still supporting plain text. I'm not sure on the exact status on that. But I know that was a little bit of it. It's just the transition is always hard from less secure to more secure. It's a good transition, but it can be hard in UX. Another little just tidbit here is that we support trusted client apps. I'm guessing that the VS Code one, do you know, Imra, if the VS Code instance-wide client application is trusted, meaning when you connect with it, there's no screen that says like, do you authorize GitLab to access your identity with this scope? It just kind of sends you and then sends you right back because it's marked as trusted.
I'm not entirely sure.
It's fine. I think this came up actually in one of the conversations with the team, the code suggestions team, because they were doing some kind of an OAuth, or they were discussing doing an OAuth and OIDC flow, and they were wondering how to make it more seamless. And one way to do that is to have a trusted OAuth app, because then you don't have that whole, click accept rule. We don't have this documented anywhere. It's just Doorkeeper behavior that we do support, and I assume we support it for an internal use case. That's pretty common. Great. And so then expiring OAuth access tokens, this is a relatively new change that we was a breaking change in 15.0 that we don't support non-expiring access tokens. Before that, we would say, hey, we'll give you an access token. You can use it as long as you want, if that's what your setting is. Now they have to expire within 2 hours. This was another place where Doorkeeper caused us some issues related to the refresh flow. We thought that we'd added expiration to all of our tokens, but there was still some left over that didn't have a expiration. And this was another, I put this below, this was a gotcha to me. I also expected that somewhere in our database, there would be a table called OAuth refresh tokens. I'm like, where are the refresh tokens? Where are the refresh tokens? The refresh token is saved on the OAuth access token. It's just an attribute on the OAuth access token. So that's a little bit unexpected. I don't know if that's standard, but that's how we have it configured. Great. So then Omniauth 2 upgrade. This is my personal favorite picture of Oreo and Jake. They're both wet. So the OAuth 2 upgrade. This is that came up like in my first week that I worked at GitLab. And it's kind of how I was introduced to all of this OAuth information. So we had already mitigated that CVE. I'm sure you all remember hearing about it. It was a big deal. And it was a CSRF issue, but you could mitigate it by not allowing any GET requests in your OAuth flows, which we'd already done. So somebody had done that long before I worked at GitLab, but we still had customers, I believe, like government customers, people who have high compliance needs who are like, well, you say you've mitigated it, but like we're getting these flags in the compliance reports that you're not on the OmniAuth, like you're not on OmniAuth 2.0, the gem version that like prevents that for everybody. So that was an interesting journey. We will not hopefully have to do that again, and unless there are future CVEs that require us to upgrade to whatever the next version of the OmniAuth gem is. And this, by the way, it's not like OAuth 2.0, which is like the standard we're running, but it's like the OmniAuth gem 2.0. The important thing to note here is that because of that upgrade, because we had to get all of our OAuth gems onto, a lot of them depend on the OmniAuth gem, but they depended on old versions of the OmniAuth gem. And so in order to upgrade those, we had to vendor many of them. And I've linked there to the vendor directory. You can see which ones it is. It's OmniAuth Salesforce, OmniAuth Azure, OmniAuth Crowd. OmniAuth GitLab is vendored for a different reason, but there were more before, but we've upstreamed our changes, which has been really great. Like I think this has been a really good venue or avenue for people on Auth to participate in the open source community because we're using these gems, and a lot of them really need some more love and attention than they're getting now. So in some cases, we've been able to make to submit patches that have been accepted, which has been great, but not in all cases. So that's something to note. And also just like a wild experience going through all of our gems. We can talk about that a little more later in terms of our Ruby upgrades as well. And then deprecating and removing OAuth options. This one is challenging. So we have an OKR around consolidating and replacing unmaintained gems. And a lot of the gems that fit under the auth bucket are these OmniAuth gems. So and I think like this was a little bit maybe my fault of when I started at GitLab and I saw this, I was like, oh, we should deprecate, like this is really old, we should deprecate it. And then we made those announcements, and then of course nobody notices, nobody reads the docs. Nobody notices you're going to deprecate something until you have actually removed it. And then they're like, oh my gosh, where is my OmniAuth strategy that I love, that my company's been using like since the 80s? And they're like, oh, shoot. We thought nobody was using that anymore, but you are, and you're mad now. So Shibboleth was actually announced to be deprecated in GitLab 10. I don't know what year that was. It's a long time ago. And then we removed it. We forgot to remove it, but we removed it in 15.9. And then it was reintroduced by the community in 16.1. Which honestly, like good for them, because if they did everything we asked them to do, we didn't make it easy. We didn't say, oh, just submit, one liner. They had to fork the gem, re-release it, make some updates. So they did that. And so we're back. We have Shibboleth again. We have it with us. CAS, we removed, we haven't reintroduced it, but there are a lot of people in that issue who are unhappy. Some of them are existing customers, some of them are prospective customers. So that's challenging from a morale perspective for me. But, it is, I think Otto was the one who said that, was it IBM? Who deprecated CAS? Somebody deprecated CAS, and Otto used that as evidence that it's really just too old.
Yeah, I realized they were moving off CAS, and I'm like, okay, if IBM's moving off CAS, that means it's really ancient.
But we still have customers. And then Crowd also, we were hoping that we had announced deprecation, we were planning to remove 16.0, but we wanted to provide a workaround for folks, but we weren't able to do that in time for 16.0. And so we decided to delay until 17. And it's hard because in these cases, these are like enterprisey authentication methods that it might be difficult for these companies to remove. Like, it's not just them complaining like, oh, this is annoying. It's like, this is how they log into things. And they're not going to have the budget to move to something cool and fancy like Okta this year. So it's a challenging area for us in terms of we don't want to be supporting all of these gems that don't have any maintainers, but we also want to make our customers happy. It's a tricky balance. We are planning on removing Twitter and Facebook as OAuth strategies in 17.0, which should be less dramatic, I hope. Great. And then the final section that I want to talk about was shared OAuth setups. And this came up this week. Smriti came to backend pairing, which was really fun. And she was QAing in a community MR where somebody had added a new group claim for OIDC. And so it was the two of us, and then like two other people spent 2 hours setting up OIDC locally on her machine. And one person in that call, well, all of us had probably done it at least once before. And one person had done it like pretty recently and was like, yeah, it took me forever. And so I guess this is so one reason it would be great to do this is just for situations like Smriti was in. You know, I got an MR, this person added something to an existing OAuth strategy, like, let's try it out. I think it would be great if we could more easily set that up. And I'm open to ideas on how we could do that. The other one, like the reason I've set up almost all of these OAuth strategies at least once, or at least like half of them, is to do these audits for gem updates. So when we've upgraded Ruby, first for Ruby 3 and then Ruby 3.1 and 3.2, where there were some breaking changes, we needed to make sure all of our OAuth gems still worked. And some of the gems don't have any tests. So it was difficult to know without just setting them up. And so that was pretty time consuming, and it would be awesome if it'd be easier. So I would love to collaborate with everybody on sharing just like, config file setups really, but then also maybe some instructions on how to set up a new OAuth app. This would obviously help our customers as well if we improve our documentation on how to set things up. Anyways, that's just something that I've been thinking about recently. So with that, I think just gonna do some Q&A here. So we have first of all, does anyone want to add new questions? Or does anyone have any topics that we didn't talk about today? Because this is very like high level OAuth at GitLab. We can get into some nitty gritty if you want.
Hey, JC, it's Max here.
Hey.
I have a quick question, but maybe first of all, I should explain why somebody from legal is on that call. I was just looking at the GitLab shared agenda, and completely by effect of opportunity, I've seen that call, and I've just figured, just for general knowledge, but also for a few questions that I should pop in. And I appreciate this is very technical. So I'm just going to ask a high-level question, and please let me know if that should be maybe more one-on-one conversation or something that should not be discussed on that call. But I'm just interested generally about the position of OAuth generally, because we had a few very confusing case with sales, and just discovered that sales is generally not super aware or in control of those features when it comes to clients. So I was just wondering, where is this going? Like in the future in terms of penetration with the customers. Like, is it going to develop? Like what's the ratio of usage? Anything like this. And I have a couple of other questions, but just as broadly as it gets for now. Is there anything you can share on that?
So the question, let me see if I can repeat back your question and make sure I understand it. So the question is kind of like where do we see the future of OAuth going, or like how much are we investing in OAuth as a feature set? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, pretty much, because I got, like, the past year I got 3 times where we had to do legal languages for accommodating that feature for some of the customers. And for us, in terms of contract, it just boils down as creating a license key, limiting the features on this single one. And that creates a lot of complication because you need to create audits and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into the details of the legal language, but it's very sort of complex from a contract management perspective. So I was just wondering, since I know before those cases I knew nothing about that, and I've hearing the content of that meeting was very helpful. I was just wondering, for somebody who's not part of that team, and where we have to, give that feature to some customers, like, is this going to develop, like what's the current, usage of that feature amongst our clients, like any sort of like broad information that you can give.
I would say, and others can jump in too, because I know we got Adel here, who's the manager of the OAuth team and has the full perspective, and other folks who've been at GitLab a long time. From what I can tell, based on like the focus of our team and the features that I see getting attention, SAML OAuth is a huge focus, because SAML is what enterprises want to use to have more control over the access that their employees have, and they want to be able to, when that employee leaves the company, remove their access from everything easily, right, with SSO. And so they remove their access over in their single sign-on, and then they can't log into GitLab anymore. Their access is shut off, which is what that's what we do right at GitLab with Okta. We have Okta to access lots of things so that when people leave the company, we can easily make sure that we're in compliance, their access is removed. So I would say that OAuth, as it relates to SAML, is a very large focus of our team, and definitely something that's going to see a lot of investment. I don't know if others had other thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, just to back up on that, OAuth generally as a strategy is probably one of the core areas that we will have for the foreseeable future. So when folks ask us like, hey, LDAP, SAML, OAuth, etc., and these 3 are probably all equally large, but the newer types, or the ones that are adopted more and more, will be SAML or OAuth. OAuth specifically, when people care a bit less about authorization and a bit more about authentication, it's also a bit more lightweight in terms of adoption. So if you look at our usage, I think Google OAuth has pretty large usage. So I don't expect it to go away. I think it will stick around. We haven't had a lot of asks from an enterprise in terms of like adding more features to it. So that's why you might not see it in terms of our roadmap, but it will be around.
Okay. Yeah, no, and that's helpful, because when, again, it's really just to try to be consistent, with what the customer expects and what we can deliver from a contract perspective. The case I was talking about, it was with Gameloft, and the OAuth was used for connection with Mattermost, which is the internal sort of equivalent of Slack. So you probably know that use case as well. And that went, through numerous people and numerous sort of like calls to understand exactly what that was supposed to mean, including whether those users should be billed or not. And there's quite a set of open topics as well, with that regard. So what I'm trying to do here is just trying to understand whether this is going to be a growing demand, and try to identify, like your roadmap, because as Jesse, rightfully say, like whenever you guys publish something, it rarely goes to people like me. So it's just genuinely curiosity and just trying to understand where this is going.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, who can I follow up to if I have further question on this, specifically on the billing of those licenses?
Billing of those licensed users. I mean, you can.
Currently, they are free, as I understand it.
Yeah, so I think it will need a bit more background, but the couple of folks that should be helpful, it would be fulfillment or billing team, like that's group fulfillment and auth. And then between both of us, I think I'm sure we can answer your question.
Yeah, because there's a couple of open issues that would need to be progressed a little bit. Okay, so if you can send me some name in the chat, I'll appreciate it.
Okay.
Great. I see another question here, which I would love a community response to, which is what is the easiest way to test OAuth GitLab? And I think the follow-up question, of course, is, GitLab as the OAuth client or GitLab as the OAuth resource? I don't know who asked this question, so I can't be sure. But what are people's go-to? If you have to test something, if you have to test OAuth, like GitLab as the OAuth client, what is your go-to strategy?
If you need access tokens, I think we have a pretty good documentation on the access token and refresh token flows. I usually just go to the documentation and copy the code examples there. I will find the page and link it in the doc.
Got it. So that would be for GitLab as resource server or authorization server.
Yes.
Server. And then Alvin's responding there. Yeah, I don't know. I was playing around with this today, trying to figure out the easiest way. OAuthDebugger.com. Ooh, cool. That looks neat. Nice. Sweet.
There is another one that I can't find it right now. I can't find it right now, but there's another one that you could use. So the OAuth debugger is like, it's useful if you want to see what. So for example, if you've configured GitLab as the identity provider, you can use the OAuth debugger to see what it's sending. And you can do the same if you've configured some other, like, Azure or something like that. You can point it to this thing and it'll show you what's being returned. And it's able to decrypt it as well. It's able to decrypt the response quite nicely as well. So it's quite nice. But this tool is used mostly for seeing what the authentication, the authorization server is returning. Right. There is another tool that I used to mess around with quite a bit. There was actually a pre-configured OAuth provider. I can't find where I've put that link.
Provider. Is it Keycloak? Maybe it's like a generic.
Ooh,
open
some of our customers actually use Keycloak, but no, it wasn't Keycloak. It's like this. It's this pre-made identity. It's this pre-made OAuth identity provider, and so they give you the URL and the metadata URL and everything, and all you have to do is just put that stuff in, and you can then you can use it. All the user database is open, like you use it for testing to see whether your application is able to consume the OAuth tokens that are returned from an OAuth provider. But I just can't find it.
Okay, you'll let us know. Update the doc when you find it. We'll look into that. That's cool. It looks like there's a question here, and then so how does OAuth relate to SAML or even LDAP or Kerberos? I never know how to say that word. It's embarrassing. Does somebody in the audience want to answer that? I can answer it, but I've been talking for a while. Anyone?
I asked that question from a non-dev background. I don't come from a dev background, so the question was more from a non-dev background, like how. So I know, like you've explained earlier in the call, that we use the doorkeeper gem to when we're using GitLab as an authorization server, but do do the different OAuth providers use different gems? Like I see that there's like an OmniAuth controller.
Yes. Okay, yes. So people feel free to jump in as I go here. But one thing that's interesting is that, and I just linked to the docs there, is that SAML, like the way that we have SAML configured, you configure, like SAML is a subset of OmniAuth. It is one OmniAuth provider, one OmniAuth client that you can set up. And so people can log in with SAML, and they click on the sign in with SAML button on GitLab. They're sent over to some other place that they log into, and then sends information back to us. And so the way you set it up from like an admin perspective is very similar to any other like OAuth strategy, right? Like you have to add some configuration, some information about your SAML app, but it is a different protocol. So it uses, if you look at the docs there, it has like the IDP cert fingerprint, the IDP SSO target URL. So it's a little bit different from kind of the more generic OAuth apps. But it's like OmniAuth SSO. Is there anything else I should mention in terms of kind of at a high level, the difference between like the relationship between OAuth and SAML? I feel like I've done a poor job explaining that.
No, that's you did pretty well. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll revisit it. I'll look up some metaphors, do some thinking on that. Eduardo asked a question here about why do you want to remove Facebook OAuth? Love this question. So there is a little bit of discussion in the related issue. If you click on that, and part of it is that there's very little usage. So we do have graphs that show us the overall usage, and it's very, very, very tiny. I can't remember what it is, but it like doesn't even show up on our usage graph. It's so small. And then the gem is somewhat maintained, but we are like 5 major versions behind. So I would assume, I haven't actually looked that deeply into this, like I would assume that the version that we are on in the OmniAuth Facebook gem right now, like is just entirely different. We'd have to do a whole complex kind of upgrade process. Like, oh, now, you know, you're gonna have to use these different configurations, right? I think the version we're using is almost 10 years old. It's a really old gem. So we would have to provide a path for customers to upgrade, which is quite a lot of effort, right? Like that itself is a breaking change to say we're going to upgrade the Facebook gem. And now when you configure Facebook as an OAuth provider, you're going to have to do this, that, and the other. It might even be that this happened with Twitter as well, that our Twitter gem only supports like OAuth 1.0, and there's the newer like if we wanted to support the newer OAuth protocol, this is the gem version, but the newer OAuth protocol, we would have to use a totally different library, have different configurations. And that's a lot of effort to go through for something that almost nobody is using. So it seems like the easier approach is just to deprecate it. And then the other thing is it's also not very disruptive to customers to do that because they can just set up a password on their account. Like it doesn't lock them out of their account forever. It doesn't mean that you know, it's not like the Crowd, Shibboleth, and CAS use cases where those are enterprisey ways of logging in that employees at companies are using. Like nobody is tied to Twitter through their work as a login method.
Yeah, I see. It makes sense. No, I understand that maintaining 20 methods of login, it is, but I wanted to hear exactly what are the criteria, if it's maintainability, if we are using all libraries, if there is a threshold of the number of users. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We do also have a GitLab dependency quality guideline that's relatively new. That I would say almost none of the OAuth gems really meet. Definitely the Twitter one doesn't, in terms of it doesn't have good test coverage, it doesn't have CI, it just doesn't meet our standards. So it's like we either find a new gem, if it doesn't exist, we build it ourselves. So that is another reason in terms of that's this not just the standard of number of users using the feature, but the quality of the library itself. Yeah, we could add specs too. I did upstream we've been upstreaming changes, and in some cases, like we will make further efforts towards that. We have plans to do that for several gems.
Well,
but we
maybe there
can't do
is
it
a
for all of
learning.
them.
Maybe there is a learning thing opportunity here, right? That embracing things that are of low quality or it has a price, right? And I think we are paying the price ourselves. So maybe we need to be more careful about what gems are we using in the future, because otherwise we can be in a corner ourselves in a very bad situation.
Yes. And that's like the OmniAuth 2.0 upgrade, and then every Ruby upgrade, we've had to, again, manually test a lot of these. So it is an ongoing burden on us to maintain them. It's not just like, oh, it's just set it and forget it. It's over there working. And in fact, Twitter OAuth does not work on GitLab.com right now. And we've gotten one issue about it. I think it's been broken for months. So it's not even working currently. We might be able to fix it. We'll see. But yes, it's an ongoing cost for sure, but it's a tough decision. Next question. Manoj, we talked about trusted OAuth apps. There is a column on the table. It is manual to set it, I'm pretty sure. I honestly like noticed this because at my last company, we were like huge into trusted OAuth apps. Like all of our apps talk to each other via trusted OAuth apps. And it was just like this, we were like, oh yeah, just create a trusted OAuth app. So that's why I kind of noticed it, but it's not documented everywhere. It's not part of the public API, but we do support it. I looked in the Git history even to see when we started supporting it. It's been in there since the code was ported over from somewhere else. Like you can't even trace when we added it. So there's not a lot to know, but we do support trusted OAuth apps.
So it looks like a case of actually going to Rails console and updating to trusted.
Yeah, okay. I think so. I think that's right. Okay, can we have some examples of scenarios or OIDC is favored over SAML? Love this. Yes. So actually there was a really great example of this recently, which is that we so with OIDC, and this is where I get confused in terms of describing it a whole high level difference between OIDC and OAuth, but like when you use the OpenID Connect strategy to log in with GitLab, it's like a regular OAuth flow, it logs you in, but then it sends you an additional JSON web token that includes information about the user. And I know Abu Bakr has been pushing us to lean on OIDC in more use cases. And I think part of the benefit is that if you need additional information about the user account, you could just get it from that JWT. You don't even have to make another request to GitLab using the OAuth access token. You just have that information already, and you can add different information into that JWT that's helpful. So that's really nice. Anybody else have any like scenarios or situations where like OIDC would be preferred over SAML or another strategy? And OIDC is supported by a lot. So we set up, with Spreedy and I, when we were pairing, OIDC is supported by Okta. That's what we're using, right, Spreedy? We set up Okta?
Yes.
Yes. So we set up Okta using the OpenID Connect OAuth strategy. And then the user logs in with Okta, then we log them in on our side. We get the response back. We say, great, you are this user. This is your email address. Boom, you're in. And then we also have this JWT that contains information. In the case that she was testing, that JSON web token with OIDC contained information about which groups in that OAuth resource server and Okta are auditor groups. So it's like make anybody who's in that group an auditor in GitLab, which is pretty cool. So I feel like there's a lot of extensions you can build onto that, where you can add different things into OIDC, different claims, and then do interesting stuff in terms of assigning users to groups and knowing what their access levels should be and things like that.
Yeah, OIDC usually comes up as like a very lightweight protocol. So if anytime I have to write like my personal app, I'm like, yeah, OIDC is simple enough. Throw the claims in user object and a token, and I'm a happy camper. Versus SAML requires a bit more parsing to understand how that assertion is going to work. It may be a bit more secure, I guess. I guess they're probably the same in terms of security, but OIDC is just very lightweight and it's pretty API friendly.
Yeah, I think of SAML as being more like enterprisey and corporate.
Yeah,
Like,
I wanted to add that it looks like most enterprise users are using SAML only. So probably it's more secure. Overall OIDC, maybe that's the reason.
okay, so there's one more question from Otto about how we don't support OAuth 2.0. We don't support the Twitter OAuth 2 integration. That's true, because the gem that we're using doesn't support it.
Okay, and I guess the part I wanted to clarify was when they spoke about Twitter being broken, it's essentially that, hey, we need to move to 2.0, and that's the problem that we didn't.
It's not, I was able to get 1.0 working today. I posted this in Slack. I was able to get our existing integration. I set up a new, it was like the Wild West in the Twitter developer area. It was nuts back there. I found some old apps. Sorry?
I think it was Wild West at Twitter generally for the past 6 months.
Yeah, I found my way into developer.twitter.com. I posted about the CAPTCHA they made me do. It was the most intense CAPTCHA I've ever had to do. It was like an IQ test that I failed. And so I got in, I got into developer console. I created a new OAuth app, and I was able to, with my GDK, log into GitLab with Twitter. So our existing library does somehow work, but the one that's on the setup on GitLab.com doesn't work. Eduardo asks if I've seen Arco's lab. Isn't Arco's what? Oh, Arco's is what we're using for anti-abuse in GitLab. Is it a really difficult CAPTCHA, Eduardo?
Well, it's not, but sometimes you have to stare at the screen like for 5 seconds. Oh, what? Because there are in different positions, there are certain things, and it's kind of funny. When you encounter this for first time, you are, what is this?
Yeah. What? Yeah, these, I guess, as you know, the bots get smarter, the CAPTCHAs get harder. So anyways, the Twitter saga continues, but we're near the end of our time. We're actually past, I said this would be a 50-minute meeting, and we're now past that. So thank you, everybody, for coming to this. I hope that I met you at the right level of high level, low level. There was some code links. There were some high level discussions of deprecating things. So I hope that people learned some things or just remembered some things you already knew, because all of you know a lot about OAuth already, or many of you do. And yeah, this was fun.
Thank you. Just one reminder before we're closing for the team members, the engineers. Remember that we have this break get together. So that Ngosha is helping to organize. I know that Imre has already booked the hotel. I'm planning to do it today. So I think it will be fun to see each other. I don't know about you, Manoj, if you are planning to come or if you have here, but for others, it will be too far, maybe. Bogdan? I'm sorry. Okay. Yes, I wanted to remind you about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Jesse.
Later.
That's great, really.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.